Hello friends, we'll be discussing an illustration which will be related completely to issue of debentures, and that will be a part of under subscription, rather not over subscription here. Under subscription will be a common part in all the three cases. In the previous video, we have understood about oversubscription being a common part, and then certain details were added to it. Now, in this question, we'll have under subscription as a common part with the par premium and discount issue, and according to that, we'll have certain case studies for our reference. So let's start with the case one of it. Now, the first case will refer to Mrs. ABC Limited. Let's figure out what exactly do we have in this case study here. Now, the question mentions that Mrs. ABC Corporation Limited issued 10,007% debentures of rupees 100 each year or at rupees 100 each year. This has been mentioned. Now, the payable response, or rather the amount that is supposed to be paid off, is also supposed to be mentioned. So let's mention that part. Now, on application, they took around 20 rupees. On allotment, they took around 50 rupees. And on final call, they took around rupees 30. This has been mentioned, or rather, these are the details out of which the payable amount has to be provided in 3 calls basically. Now, let's go on to the next part, whereby subscription will be a part of it. Now, the subscription they have received here was for 8,000 debentures, which has been mentioned. Out of that subscription, there is also certain call scenarios that will be mentioned here. Now, when it comes to call scenarios, Mr. X, who had around 200 debentures, failed to pay the allotment and the final call money, which has been mentioned. There's another person, Mr. Y, who had around 500 debentures, who paid, or rather who failed to pay the final call money, as they have mentioned in this question. Let's go on to the next part. We have to prepare the journal entries and balance sheet in this question, so which has been mentioned. Let's go on to the case 2 now. Now, case 2 refers to Messrs. Extreme Limited, who has issued 20,000 10% debentures to raise a fund, or rather to raise a loan at the rate of 110 with a face value of rupees 100. That means these debentures, the face value was rupees 100. They have issued them at 110. This is what they have mentioned. Now, let's go and figure out that there is a premium here that has to be taken into consideration, because the face value is 100, you're issuing it at 110. So this is a premium case. Now let's go on to the payable amount. Now, on application and final call, they are taking 30 each. On allotment, they're taking 50 rupees, which includes the premium of rupees 10 as well. That means 40 rupees is capital, 10 rupees is the premium here. Now, let's go on to the next part, whereby subscription will be a part here. Now, the subscription they have received here was for 19,000 debentures, as they have mentioned in the question. Now, there will be certain call scenarios in this case study as well. Now, there are 2 call scenarios. Mr. Z, who had around 5,000 debentures, he failed to pay the final call money. And Mr. A, who had around 2,000 debentures, failed to pay the allotment and the final call, which has been mentioned here. So, both these call money or rather both these calls in arrears have to be prepared. Now, let's go on to the requirement part of this case study. Now, in this case study, we have to prepare the bank account, the debenture capital account, and the journal entries and the balance sheet as well. These are the four requirements of this specific case study. Let's go on to case 3, which will be the last case of this illustration. Now, the case 3 refers to Messrs. L&T Infotech issued 15,011% debentures of rupees 200 each at rupees 150. That means this is a clear case of discount. Let's figure out the payable amount. Now, on application, allotment, and final call, they're taking equal amount, that is 50, 50, 50. This is the final amount, or rather, this is the bifurcation. As there is a discount here, you need to make sure that the total amount that we're supposed to receive as a discount will be incorporated in terms of allotment due. So, that is one thing that you need to remind yourself of. Let's go on to the subscription part now. Now, in this case study, we have a little twist for you. Subscription that we have received here was for 20,000 debentures. Yes, there is a oversubscription case. We have mixed it for your reference. Now, oversubscription when it comes to discount has been mentioned here, and all the shares were allotted in the forms of pro rata. Now, let's figure out the call scenarios. Now, there is only one call in array that we have to mention here. Mr. B, who had around 100 debentures, failed to pay the final call money. This has been mentioned. These are the only things that we have to mention in this specific format. Let's figure out what is the requirement of this case study now. Now, in this case study, you have to prepare the journal account, you have to prepare the bank account, you have to prepare the discount on debenture account as well, along with the debenture capital and the balance sheet. So, 5 requirements basically that you have to prepare in this, or rather the last case study. Now that we are clear about what all case studies we have to go through, let's start with the case 1 journal entries first of all. So, when we're talking about the case 1 journal entries, we understand that there has been certain issue, but there is an undersubscription in case 1. So, we'll first pass the entry related to receipt of application money for debentures with the narration related to it. Let's start with that. Now, as the issue that was made in case 1 was for 10,000, however, the subscription that we received was only for 8,000. Hence, however, whatever calculations you have to do, you have to go according to the 8,000 applications itself. Hence, 8,000 will be taken into consideration with the application money that will be multiplied to it. So that is a total of 1,60,000 that we have to take into consideration. Now, let's start with the narration on this point. Now that the first entry has been done, we have to transfer that application money to the debenture account. So we'll pass that entry now. So whatever money we have earned, that is 1,60,000, will be moved to 7% debenture account here directly. Let's mention the narration now. Now, once the application is completed, we have to go with the allotment due. As this is a par case, that means wherever it has been mentioned that the face value is 100, or rather whatever is the face value is equivalent to the issue price, that is a par case. Hence, it is mentioned clearly in the question, this is the par case. Hence, we'll mention the allotment due entry now. Let's start with that part. Now, when you're dealing with allotment due, it will be only for 8,000 shares because that is the only allotment that can be done and not 10,000 here. Now, the allotment money has been mentioned as rupees 50. Hence, 8,000 multiplied by 50 is something that we are expecting out of here, or rather expecting out of allotment here. Let's mention the amount. So allotment due has been mentioned. Now let's go on to the next part of the entry, which refers to receipt of allotment money, where there will be certain calls in arrears. Let's start with that. Now 4 lakh is the amount that we are expecting. Out of that, calls in arrears were somewhere around 200 multiplied by 50, because there is one person, Mr. X, who had around 200 debentures with him who didn't pay the final and the allotment money. So we'll mention that here. So out of 4 lakh, 10,000 we haven't received it because that is calls in arrears. So total that we would have received is 3,90,000. We have mentioned that thing accordingly here. Let's mention the narration now. Now, after allotment receipt has been done, we have to pass the entry for final call due. So let's mention that part first. So in total, we have to mention amount expected on final call is 2,40,000. 30 rupees on final call is what we have mentioned here. So 8,000 multiplied by 30 will give you a total of 2,40,000 here. Now that we have mentioned the final call due entry, we are supposed to mention the last part of the entry, which will refer to applications, or rather which will refer to receipt of final call money due, which has been mentioned here right now. So the next entry will be receipt of final call with the calls in arrears in it, because again, Mr. X and Mr. Y, there were two persons who didn't pay up the total of final call money for 200 shares for X and 500 shares for Y. So let's mention that part. So the last entry that we are going to mention here is the receipt of final call money with calls in arrears. Now, the entry that we'll be passing here is bank account debit, calls in arrears account debit to debenture final call account. Now we're expecting an amount of 2,40,000, but we're not going to receive that much of amount because total of 700 shares didn't pay up the final call money, or rather 700 debentures didn't pay up the final call money. So let's mention that as calls in arrears. So the total that we'll receive in bank account is 2,19,000. Now that we have mentioned this thing here, the next part is to prepare the balance sheet. So let's start with the balance sheet now. Now, while we are calculating the details of the balance sheet, the first thing that will be totaling up is the bank account details. That means bank account total on the asset side. So let's figure out how much is the total. For that, whatever bank account debits we have done, we'll just add up the total. So we'll get the total of the bank account here. So wherever bank account debit has been done, only that total has to be taken into consideration. If there is any bank account credit, that much amount will be subtracted there. So the total amount that we have received in bank will be 7,69,000. Now, the next part will be the debenture capital account, out of which calls and errors will be subtracted here. So let's mention that. Now, while mentioning the details in this specific liability side, I've mentioned the issued capital, but that total hasn't, or rather, you're not supposed to take that total here. The reason being, the issued capital may be mentioned, but the subscribed will be equivalent to the issued, or rather, we only have to take the subscribed capital here because there is under subscription in this case. So the total capital can be 8 lakh rupees that we have mentioned here, out of which calls and errors will be subtracted and whatever balance is left will be mentioned on the outer column. So the total calls and arrears that we have here is 31,000. If you subtract that from 8 lakh, you get a total of 7,69,000. So now if we can figure out, both the liability total is equivalent to the asset total here, which marks the closure of case 1. So here case 1 has been completed. Now it's time to hop on to case 2 and figure out what needs to be prepared there. Now it's time to mention the case 2 details. In case 2, we had mentioned that we had issued 20,000 debentures at a value of 110, which was a premium here that was mentioned. Now we'll mention that the total subscription that we have received here was only for 19,000. So 19,000 receipt of application money will be the first entry that will be passing. So let's start with that. So the total of receipt that we have received here is 19,000 multiplied by 30, that is 5,70,000. Let's mention that and then we'll post the narration there. Now, the second entry that we have to pass here is transfer of this application money to the debenture capital account. So let's pass that entry. Now, after application money being transferred here, the next step is to mention the allotment due. Now, as this is a case of premium, we understand that 40 rupees is the total capital and 10 rupees is the premium that we're taking, for which allotment total comes to 50 rupees. So 19,000 multiplied by 50 is the expected amount, which will be bifurcated between premium and the capital. So let's mention that here. Now, the bifurcation has been mentioned here. Let's mention the amount, post which we'll go ahead and mention the narration accordingly. 9,50,000 is the total amount that we're expecting, out of which this 9,50,000 will be bifurcated into certain capital and certain premium. So 7,60,000 is the debenture capital, 1,90,000 is the premium. Let's mention the narration here. Now, the next entry after due will be the receipt of allotment money, but that will have certain calls in arrears, as Mr. A in case 2, who had around 2,000 debentures, failed to pay the allotment and the final call. So we have to mention that. Whereas Mr. Z, who had 5,000 debentures, only failed to pay the final call money. So we don't have to take that part into consideration. However, for Mr. A, 2,000 debentures will be mentioned as calls in arrears. Now the calls in arrears will be 2,000 multiplied by 50. Expected amount is somewhere around 9,50,000, which includes the premium as well. So 8,50,000 is the amount that we have received here. Now that we have completed the allotment, the last two entries will refer to final call due and final call receipt. So let's pass that entry now. Now the fifth entry that we are passing here is the final call due. So let's pass that. Now, final call due will be 19,000 multiplied by 30. So that will be a total of 5,70,000. Let's pass the receipt entry whereby there are two calls in arrears now. Now, Mr. Z and Mr. A both had 5,000 and 2,000 debentures who didn't pay the final call money. That means total of 7,000 debentures. We haven't received the final call money. That will be our call in arrears. So out of 5,70,000, if 2,10,000 we haven't received, that means whatever balance is left will be the amount that we have received in our bank account. So that will be the receipt of final call by what we have mentioned here. Now, the next step is to prepare the various accounts that we have to mention here. That means we have to prepare the balance sheet as well as the bank account and the debenture capital account. So let's start with the bank and debenture capital account first, post which we'll go ahead and prepare the balance sheet here. Now, we'll prepare the bank account for this, then we'll prepare the debenture capital account, and then we'll move towards the preparation of balance sheet. So let's start with the preparation of bank account first of all. Now, while preparing the bank account, wherever bank has been debited, we'll mention the opposite entry to it. Like, for example, bank account to debenture application is the entry. So on the debit side of bank account, we'll be mentioning it as to debenture application with the amount related to bank. Let's start with that. So the first thing that we have mentioned here is to debenture application 5,70,000 rupees. Let's mention the next entry. So all the items that were related to bank account have been mentioned here. Now it's time to tally and figure out the balancing figure. So the balancing figure is on the credit side, which is 17,80,000. Now on similar pattern, we'll prepare the debenture account here. So the first entry that will be passing here is transfer of application money to debenture account. The entry was debenture application to 10% debenture account. So on the credit side of 10% debenture account, we'll mention as by debenture application. Similar to that, we have allotment and final call. So we'll mention that entry now. So 10% debenture account has been also prepared. Now it's time to figure out the balancing figure and the final tally of this account. So the balancing figure here is 19 lakh rupees. Now that we've prepared both these accounts, it's time to prepare the balance sheet. So let's start with the balance sheet account here. So the first thing that we'll be mentioning is the debenture total capital and the bank account, which I've already figured out the balancing figure. Let's mention that here. So the cash and cash equivalent bank account will be 17,80,000. Let's move on to 10% debenture capital, which will be the base capital, out of which calls and arrears have to be subtracted. So as we have already figured out 10% debenture balancing total, we have already mentioned that here. We just have to subtract calls in arrears from this. So the total shareholders fund, or rather we have as debenture capital, is 15,90,000, but we still have to add securities premium on the liability side because that was also a part of this question. So let's mention that. Now, as security premium calls in arrears has been already considered in the total capital, hence we are not subtracting the calls in arrears from security premium, which we usually used to do earlier. Hence, the whole total has been mentioned outside. Now it's time to figure out the balance sheet total. That means liability side should be equivalent to the asset side here. So both the total of liability and asset is equivalent to 17,80,000, which has been mentioned. Here we complete the case 2. Now it's time to prepare the case 3 details. So let's start with the journal entries of case 3 first. Now, as we know that this entry, or rather this case, refers to oversubscription, so we'll pass the entry according to that. The first thing that we are doing here is that this is a discount case and there is an oversubscription. So first will be 20,000 applications that we received. We'll take the application money first. So let's pass that entry now. So the total of application money was 50 rupees. Hence 20,000 multiplied by 50 is the application that we have received here. So application money, we have mentioned the details. Now the next phase is to go ahead and prepare, or rather transfer this application money to the total allotment, or rather we can say the debenture account. But before transferring, let's make sure that applications can be only transferred for 15,000. Additional whatever we have received will be considered while taking allotment into the case history, or rather allotment details here. Let's start with that then. So the entry that we have passed here is debenture application account debit to 11% debenture to debenture allotment adjustment account, which has been mentioned. Now let's figure out the total. Debenture application that we have received is for 10 lakh rupees. Out of that, debenture which will be only transferred to applications capital is 15,000 multiplied by 50. Only that much of amount will be transferred here. So out of 10 lakh, 7 lakh 50 only can be transferred. The rest, whatever is left, is referred to 15,000, or rather additional 5,000 what we have received. That is 2 lakh 50,000 total here. Let's mention that. Now this 2 lakh 50,000 can be utilized when we are supposed to receive the allotment money. Now, the next entry that you have to pass is debenture allotment due. But make sure, as there is discount in here, you have to take that discount also into consideration. So, the total face value of debenture allotment will be 100 rupees. But as we are providing 50 rupees discount, you have to take that into consideration as well. However, the receipt will be only for 50 rupees itself. So the entry that has been mentioned is debenture allotment account debit, discount on debenture account debit to 11% debenture here. Let's mention the values also. So in total, we are expecting 15 lakh rupees out of allotment. That means 15,000 multiplied by 100, because 50 rupees of discount, 50 rupees of allotment, total gives you 100 rupees. So that has been mentioned here. But again, while segregating into debit side, we'll mention that 15,000 into 50 as debenture allotment money and 15,000 multiplied by 50 as discount here. So ideally 7 lakh 50,000 is what we can expect, because rest 7 lakh 50,000 we have already given as discount. So let's mention the narration now. Now the next entry will be receipt of allotment money here. As there is no calls and errors related to allotment, hence there will be no calls and errors in this phase as well. So the receipt entry that we have passed here is bank account debit, debenture allotment adjustment account debit to debenture allotment. We're expecting 7,50,000, but 2,50,000 we have already received in terms of applications of pro rata. So whatever balance is left will be our bank account details. So in total, we have received only 5 lakh rupees on allotment here. Now, the next entry will refer to final call due. Again, the amount of expectation will be 15,000 multiplied by 50 here. Now, the next phase is to mention the entry related to receipt of final call money. Let's start with that. Now, the call scenarios will be 100 debentures for which final call money was not paid. So that is calls in arrears. So total amount that we have received in our bank account is only 7,45,000. Let's mention the narration now. Now with this, we have completed the entries related to these specific topics, or rather the specific case study. Next part is to prepare the relevant accounts. Now apart from bank account, debenture account, we have to also prepare the discount on debenture account, and post that we'll prepare the balance sheet. So let's start with that. Now we'll first prepare the bank account details. So the first thing that we'll be mentioning here is wherever bank account has been debited, accordingly we'll pass the entries here. So let's start with that. So debenture application has been mentioned, debenture allotment has been mentioned, debenture final call also has been mentioned. Now let's figure out, or rather, let's figure out the total of the bank account here, as there is no other entry that needs to be passed. So bank account has been prepared, balance has been also calculated, which is 22,45,000. Next account is debenture account. Now, just on the basis of how we prepared bank account, we have to go ahead and prepare the details for this debenture account as well. So let's start with that. So we have prepared the debenture application, or rather debenture account itself. We have mentioned application, we have mentioned allotment, we have also included the discount, and we have mentioned the final call. Now it's time to prepare the final tally of this. So the final tally comes to 30 lakh rupees, which has been mentioned here. Now the last will be discount on debentures account. Now there is just one discount on debenture which was provided, and that was mentioned in the allotment. So to 11% debenture will be the entry that will be passed here on the debit side. So that's the final total of this. Let's tally it and let's then move to preparation of balance sheet then. So now that we have prepared the relevant details, it's time to figure out what is the balance sheet total. So let's start with the preparation of balance sheet, which is the last part of this case. So the first total that we'll be mentioning here is on the asset side, bank account. Now, apart from cash and cash equivalent, what we have mentioned, discount is also miscellaneous expense. Hence, we'll mention that on the asset side as well. Now that we have mentioned all these details, let's move on to the liability side and mention the debenture capital after subtracting the calls in arrears here. So 11% debenture has been mentioned with 30 lakhs as total. Calls and errors have to be subtracted from that. So that gives you a total of 29 lakh 95,000 here, which has been mentioned. Now it's time to finalize the liability total and the asset total here. Equivalent amount is 29 lakh 95,000. So here we complete the illustration related to case 3, as we have already finalized the balance sheet total here. So I hope with the undersubscription of debentures here and how it has been incorporated into 3 different scenarios with oversubscription, undersubscription being a part of it, this video would have been made cleared, or rather this video would have cleared all certain small details about oversubscription and undersubscription of debentures. So thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.